All right, so welcome to Bible study. We are starting in today kind of the next stage of the Genesis story. We've kind of heard a little bit of Abraham, we've heard a lot of promises, but what's coming up today is the kind of the central problem that's going to hang with us for a while, and that is the fact that Abram's been promised a lot of children, but Sarai at this point hasn't had any children. And so we talked kind of last time about the meaning of a covenant. We had this whole ritual with the animals being cut apart, God kind of going through the middle of these cut animals with a torch, and this whole ceremony that's kind of weird to us. But all of that was in some ways to promise Abram that God was going to come good on these promises, that Abram was going to have many children. And so we're kind of left in that kind of limbo space where the promise has been made. There's kind of a bunch of questions. Just for reference, this whole issue of Abram not having a direct descendant is introduced in chapter 11, verse 30. This is after the lineage that we read from Noah to Abram. And in verse 30, 29 says, Abram and Nahor took wives, and the name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, and she was the daughter of Haran's father of Milcah, yada, yada, yada. Verse 30, now Sarah was barren and had no children. And that's like kind of the last we've heard on the subject, except for Abram saying, I don't have an heir, I don't have an heir. God, what's happening? And so we kind of see in this next chapter, the Abram and his wife Sarai kind of take things into their own hands, and they're trying to find a way to do this. So I want to just gauge some initial reactions from this story, because there's a lot here, and there's a lot specifically going on here that may feel a little bit poignant right now. So what are some thoughts that you are having reading this story of Sarai and Hagar, Ishmael, Abram, and all of these messy dynamics here?
It sounds to me, of course, it's very sad when you keep wanting to have a child and you're 90 years old. But what strikes me is that there are a lot of different writers, and they have different purposes, and it's very confusing. So it isn't, I don't know whether God kept promising and forgetting, or whether there are a bunch of writers that are telling the same story differently. But they're trying with Hagar and then treating her badly, and then God has to intervene to say, you know, you can go back and have your baby. And then, of course, he's made into a terrible person, and it is very, very confusing. But the story of Sarah seems that when they told they really can do it, it's going to happen, she's not even sure she's interested in, you know, because are they interested in sex anymore? I think that's what they're saying. And somebody as old as I can even, as I am, can even do it. It's very, yeah, it is sad. And I'm not even sure when it finally happens, because then they start talking about circumcision. And then Sarah treats Hagar very badly because she's one-upped her. But that was, yeah. I don't know whose idea that was.
So we'll talk about that. That's part of the dynamic of the story, is the fact that like Sarah gets what she wants, and she realizes she doesn't like what she wants, and there's a lot of complicated emotions.
Well, she says
a little bit whiplashy, but we're gonna dig into like kind of how that works.
Oh, you mean that
look like you're about to jump in there.
Have a surrogate, and then she doesn't like it. She feels that Hagar's not her friend anymore, that she's going to look down on her.
Yeah. What was surprising, not surprising because I've read it before, but reading it again, it seemed more surprising that Abraham kind of lost his faith in God when he went ahead and made his own plans. And that was something that I felt more surprising than when I'd read it before.
Yeah, so we can also talk about that element. I mean, like, what is Abram's role in this? What is the role of belief? How much do we do versus how much does God do? Because those are some questions.
Yes.
Even in our own life.
Well, I mean, it isn't surprising in real life when their age, he was the age he was and Sarah was the age she was. I can see how he could have sort of lost his faith, and that was sort of a challenging time for him and for her. But nevertheless, he'd had so much faith up until that point.
Yeah.
It was Sarah's idea to have the surrogate. I mean, that was her doing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And she
didn't work out so well.
So, I mean, we're going to talk about this because it's actually interesting to see how much agency the different characters have. And like, who is the actor? Who is the idea generator? Some of those elements of like, who's actually driving the plot here, and does that follow along with our expectations?
Well, Abram off totally. I mean, he backs off and leaves it to Sarai to choose her slave, to make the decision. When the slave misbehaved, he told her that it was on her to take care of it. He just totally backs away and turns everything over to her.
Right. So the one thing that I want to set up initially as we go into this, because there are some things that, how to say this, we are so removed from the culture that it is easy to look into the story and see what's happening on the surface and assume that's custom, where actually there once again is like that underlying political back and forth. And so some of these comments that we just kind of read at face value because we're not as familiar with some of it, we know some of what's going on here if you dig into some of the cultural practices that we see in other areas. And so some of this is actually complicated in some interesting ways of like actually looking at, is what they're saying normative, or are they actually instructive? And we'll go into some of this, but all that to say, some of the dynamics here are actually choices being made. It's not just like de facto, oh, she's your slave, deal with her. That's a loaded statement. So there's a lot of loaded statements through this story that I want to unpack. I just want to lay that out, is like, this is a very complicated story.
Okay.
So what's beneath the surface that we're missing?
All right, let's actually start to walk through this. Taking some notes about what you all are noticing. So I hope you all don't mind. Why I do the initial reactions is I like to see where you guys are focused on, so I know where to expand a little bit more, and like it judges what kind of information, because all of this has like doctoral theses worth of information packed into it. So, all right, so let's jump in at the beginning. And so at the beginning of 16, we have this restatement of the thing that's kind of been in the background, but now is like the problem is Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. Just statement of fact, this is what we know. The additional piece of information is we have an Egyptian slave girl. Notably, it's translated as girl and not woman, which probably means Hagar's pretty young. Named Hagar. Hagar is, once again, Hagar's name is kind of just a weird translation. My notes say that it means city, province, or region in Old Arabic. So she has an Arabic name. This is an Arab woman. supposedly from the Egypt region, which kind of just means this way and not that way. But she's very much an outsider. She is not part of the culture. She's not part of the culture where they came from. She is not part of the culture of where they are. They may have picked up Hagar when they went to and from Egypt. We don't know, but this kind of others her automatically. And as you all mentioned, Sarai is the actor in this beginning. She sees the problem. Okay, the Lord's prevented me from having children. At this point, they don't have fertility studies. They don't know what's going on here. So go into my slave girl, so it may be that I shall obtain children through her. So this actually is a common practice in the region, is using your, basically your handmaiden to bear children if the matriarch is barren. This is not unusual. We will see this again in scripture. This was kind of just normative in a way, because if you owned someone, they were property. So notably, Sarai doesn't consult Hagar here. She just decides what to do with her property. So that's the initial dynamic. I'm going to pause there to see if you all have any thoughts.
Perfectly normal, I guess. Knowing their culture, it didn't bother me that was the way she decided to do it. Certainly it's not our culture, but it was theirs. And so I consider it a normal practice, you know.
Okay. Mary Ellen?
I just have a question. Does it work the other way as well? If the patriarch is sterile, would he have children by his wife by having a slave implant her? I mean, does it go the other way as well? What does he do if he wants children, but he's the problem? Or they don't know that yet, that he's the problem. Okay, I'm following through on my own thought.
Yeah. So
the assumption is that the woman is always the problem, isn't it?
So this is one of the interesting things, is like, yes, it was always blamed on the woman because she's the one that carries the child. In modern fertility, what they are finding is actually, it is right now a huge male fertility crisis, because a lot of the chemicals we use in a lot of our products are endocrine disruptors. And so, yeah, the problem is currently in males. We don't know what was happening then. It could be equal on both sides. The other thing is, though, Mary Ellen, the answer is actually kind of, but you had to do it covertly because male lineage is huge. Like all the lineage is through the males, but there are actually some who think, we'll get to the story later, so I'm gonna just plant this seed right here. If you know the story of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, and you have Potiphar, there is actually a line of thinking that Potiphar was actually a eunuch, and the wife was doing that with Potiphar's consent. Ooh. Because Potiphar wanted a child. So there is a line of logic that actually that might have been a thing, and Joseph didn't want to play ball, and that may have been the problem, is she was doing it with her husband's consent. Anyways, so maybe. Larry, what's going on?
As far as impregnating slaves, we should ask Thomas Jefferson to say it's not part of our culture.
And we're still dealing with the legacy of it, because I believe we've talked about it before, of some of the organizations where we have, or maybe this was our other discussion group, I forget. But there are groups of descendants that are like, we're the Thomas Jefferson family, and they've had this weird relationship with the African-American community that's like, yeah, we are too. And they're like, oh, we don't want to include you. But that's some of the reality of it. Is yeah, we live in the legacy of that. Actually, most of the African-Americans in our country are mixed raced with Europeans because that was such a common practice. So yeah, that's a great point, Larry. Is not as uncommon as, or it's not that long ago that this was a practice. All right, so
rape. Wasn't it rape? But most of the time it wasn't consensual.
100%. This is not consensual, likely. This is why this text gets categorized as a text of terror. There is books written about it. That was a category of some of these scriptures that are just really hard to deal with, and the realities that are going on here.
So the assumption is Hagar wasn't a willing participant, but after she was pregnant, she got kind of uppity.
So we're going to unpack some of that language there specifically, but the thing where there's a difficulty with our modern understandings looking back in history. Our modern understandings say there is no possibility of consent because of power dynamics. And that's our current understanding, is if there is a power differential, especially the extreme power differential of someone who owns you, you cannot effectively say no, which means even if you say yes, your yes is meaningless. So this is kind of what comes into play when you're looking at anything from clergy, sexual abuse scandals, to Harvey Weinstein, to CEOs. If you cannot effectively say no, there's an abuse of power, even if the person says yes. And so that's what we see today is yes, this is not consensual because there's no way Hagar could have said no, even if she said yes in the situation. So the person who does have all the agency in this situation is Abram. And what we see here is Sarai has this idea, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Does that response ring any bells from something we've discussed before?
Adam and Eve.
Right? It's a dead ringer. Once again, there's this idea that the woman has, and the dude's just okay.
Well, if it's in their culture, I can think that the woman might just be accepting, although maybe not particularly caring for the idea. She doesn't really know about caring for the idea anyway. It's just in her culture. It's something that people did. And
so this is where I do want to complicate things a little bit, because there is both the text and the subtext. So it is common, but my question is, in the tone of the story itself, is it actually upheld as good? Because there are some things that we read, and the way that it's written, you realize that the author isn't a fan, or there is a critique of a practice. So I wouldn't take wholesale that this is common. The fact that this is the way it's written is intentionally a callback to Adam and Eve. There's a question if Sarai should be doing this. If this isn't going to cause trouble, kind of like eating the apple caused trouble. So it's common, but that doesn't mean it's not critiqued.
And what would prompt her in the first place? Why did she bring it up? If she just kept quiet, she could just keep going on the way things were.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the role of the woman and what it actually meant to be barren. Because this isn't just, we've talked a lot about the business side of it, but there is one major thing that was your role as a matriarch, and that was to have kids. And she's not doing it. So what's going into the psychology behind that? What's going on in Sarah's mind? why would it be Sarah suggesting this and not Abram requesting it?
Mhm.
Well, the child would be hers then, would be Sarah's, right?
He was planning
I
to
mean,
raise.
not that she produced it, but that Hagar's child would be Sarah's child, not Hagar's.
Okay, so keep that in mind because that is the suggestion. We will talk about whether or not that actually happens. So Mary Ellen, what's going on? What's your thought?
Well, I'm sure she was very, very aware that they had no descendants to take over this booming business and relationship with the Lord. And I mean, they're old at this point, and you know, I'm sure it was uppermost in her mind that she needed to provide an heir and couldn't, and was desperate to do it and turned to plan B. I mean, as much as Hagar was aware he didn't have any descendants and was considering this slave from Damascus, if that was the option, I'm sure Sarah wanted to keep it within their community, within his bloodline, and was desperate to find a way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose you could say, furthermore, Sarah says, the Lord has prevented me from having children. And if he's, you know, not letting me, we've got to find a way to do it, to provide an heir.
So the thing is, up until this point, Sarah's not part of this covenant.
Oh.
Fundamentally, she has not been mentioned in any of the discussions between Abram and God.
Mhm.
She's been absent from the conversation.
Mhm.
Well,
So
she's a woman. What is
she's a woman.
She can't do that.
So, but this, like, I'm trying to get us into the worldview here. The promise is that Abram's going to have descendants, not that she's going to have descendants. Abram's going to. It is
Okay.
her status that's on the line. She thinks kids will bring her status. And so know her expectation. She wants to be elevated in the eyes of others. She wants to be seen as someone who provided. Even if it's not from her body, she at least was the one who made the covenant happen. She wants to have that kind of elevation.
Mm-hmm.
But she knows she's not necessarily a player in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So did they lose faith? Or was she just looking for a way to make it happen? And if she's not part of it, she was going to make it. She was going to make her husband be the successful man he was promised to be.
I think that she thought she could do that until Hagar puffed herself. I mean, didn't get with the program, and then the puzzling part is that Abram said, deal with it the way you want to, which was harsh and awful. And
so there's two key things that those two elements are actually the thing that are harder to see. So let's keep going and we can talk about those elements because there's a few key word choices that change the whole picture. So just as like a time frame, they've lived in the land of Canaan for 10 years. So it's been 10 years since they've like went in and out of Egypt. It's been a while. And so they've been living for a decade, still no kids. And so, and here is the specific word choice that makes all the difference. Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian slave girl, and gave her to her husband as a wife.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a statement of like sexual reproduction. It's not she gave him to sleep with. She gave him as a wife.
Uh-huh. Okay.
She elevated her status.
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay.
That's the thing that makes the difference. Is there isn't an assumption of monogamy. We see this, I mean, like, oh, their kids are going to have so many different combinations of partners. Sarah is not assuming she's the only wife. The problem is she thought that this woman would elevate her, but she gave Abram this slave girl and then gave it to him as a wife.
But
So how does that change?
Yeah.
Wow.
Is that a way of legitimizing the child?
Mm-hmm. I mean, if it was just about sex and she hadn't made her a wife, it's one of those that Sarah could have claimed her, and then it would have been her child.
Oh.
This, for some reason, was chosen. There's not an explanation. By making her a wife, that kind of puts her on par with Sarah, and it's not her kid anymore.
So she must have changed her mind.
Don't know. Mary Ellen, what's going on?
Well, the concept of giving her to Abram as a wife, then you look down in 8, and she says to the angel of the Lord, I'm running away from my mistress. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll get there, because there's another thing that goes on with Abram's response, which is loaded.
Okay.
So we have this temporary status uplift, and where's the phrase? And she looked with contempt on her mistress. There is a debate on how to translate this, whether it was she lowered her eyes towards her. She does look down on her. Contempt is a charged word, which is why some translators want to stay away from it. Because all of a sudden, so she may, it does mention that she is still her mistress. So there seems to be this mid-level range where she is considered a wife, but she still doesn't have Sarah's full status. So what's going on in Hagar's mind now that she has been given against her will to an old man, but she was the one who conceived, not the woman she's been serving. And at a certain point in pregnancy, you just can't do as much just because of physical restrictions. And so you have to then be served. And so all of a sudden, this serving girl is being treated well because you have the heir to the master, or to the guy who's running everything. What's going on in Hagar's psychology now? What's she thinking? Why would she then look down on Sarah?
He wants no part of any of this. He totally turns it back to Sarah and saying, it's your slave, it's your problem. And, I don't see him owning any of this. He's just pushing it off on Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the question is, what's going on with Hagar?
In Hagar's mind.
Why does she suddenly decide to run away?
She's scared, isn't she? She's scared of.
So let's pause. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So the question at hand is, why would Hagar look down on Sarah? Why would she look at her with contempt? Why would she have this kind of change in attitude where all of a sudden she evidently doesn't think Sarah's all that great? Why would that be at play?
I think she was probably not treated with respect before. She was just a simple slave, didn't amount to anything. And all of a sudden here she is, oh, wow, now I've conceived, I've got a baby. Look at you, you don't have anything. I'm just great now. She's getting even.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts?
She's pretty sharp stuff,
Not what Sarah expected to happen.
No. But I sort of conceive Hagar's attitude. I sort of understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So can you imagine serving your whole life and kind of being treated as property or just someone to be bossed around, and all of a sudden you get a glimpse of the good life?
Yeah, would be nice, wouldn't it?
You would
And
see exactly what was kept from you.
Mm-hmm. However, she didn't handle it well.
This is one where I have a lot of compassion for Hagar because I feel like this is just human nature.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I see that now.
But so the solution that Sari thought would work made her feel bad. She really ended up feeling bad. But the puzzling thing is that Abram said, so deal with her the way you want, which was really passing the buck. And and Sarah was, I assume, quite cruel because Hagar ran away. And God had to kind of rescue her.
So, and I can understand Abram as well, though, because he did what he was told. I mean, as easy as it was, he was doing what he was said. What his wife told him to do. I really think they needed to all three sit down and have a conversation and understand each other's point of view.
100% they needed a couples therapy counselor. So here are some other dynamics to note. So Hagar was able to do what Sarah wasn't able to do. People are doting on her. People are probably giving her attention. My guess is Sarah's jealous. She thought this would elevate her status, and not only did it not, she is now not getting the attention she wants. So she complains to her husband, who, remind you, has all the power and agency in the situation. The buck stops with him, but he passes it back. And this is the other key thing to understand. By him saying, this is your slave girl, you deal with her, he is actually effectively demoting Hagar once again. Asserting that this is your slave girl then kind of revokes her status as a wife.
Yeah.
Well, so, wait a second. Can I go back a bit? Why did Sarai have her elevated as a wife? She didn't have to do that, did she?
She didn't. But it said she gave it. All we have is the information she gave him to Abram as a wife, which means we know her status was somewhat elevated.
Yeah, seems like that was not a real smart move on Sarai's part.
No. And so Abram kind of passes it back to her. It's like, you got me you got us into this mess. Deal with it. It's yours. But by saying she's your slave girl, she gets bumped back down. It goes from Abram dealing with the situation to bumping her down, sending her down a rung. That would not be unlike Thomas Jefferson being like, oh, this slave that I impregnated, oh, she's not my problem. You deal with her, wife. And how do we think a jealous wife is going to act?
Not well.
Especially one that is threatening your status, someone who is getting the attention that you want and was easily able to do something you've been trying to do for years.
But Sarah gave it to him.
Yeah.
She has no right either. She didn't, I mean, why would she do that?
So are there times where we get exactly what we want and we hate it?
Yeah.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And it isn't a given that Hagar would have behaved that way. It's understandable, but she could have been very grateful and developed a relationship with Sarai, which is what, and they could have raised the child together, or, you know, there are lots of other options.
Right.
It didn't look that way.
The other important piece of information we don't have is, what did Sarai do? It just says she treated her harshly.
Yep.
Did she threaten her life? You know, I mean, was Hagar afraid for her own well-being, and that's what prompted her to run away, or what?
So because of these dynamics, oh, go ahead, Mary Ellen.
Well, I'm going to say at this point, she's still pregnant. They haven't delivered the child yet. And so, you know, for Hagar to treat her harshly, I mean, I just picture two women at their worst verbally. No, it's ugly. It's absolutely ugly. And I don't blame Hagar for not getting in the middle of that mess at all. I mean, most adult males are aware of, you know, you don't get in the middle of two women. You back off and let them settle it, because you're not going to win. Whichever side you take, you're not going to win. And, you know, to me, treating her harshly would be verbally and the tasks that she was given, but I don't think she would endanger the baby.
So this is where I was trying to find an article that I read in school, actually a few times. And if I find it, I am going to copy it and forward it to you, because I think I only have a physical copy of it. This is where a lot of womanist, feminist theologians have looked at this and specifically seen not just two women, but a woman and a foreigner of lower status that was owned by someone. And they look at the dynamics and they see these dynamics in the American South during slavery. Yeah. Because women acted this way. And while I understand the want to think of it more being verbal, most commentators say that verbal abuse would not be enough to drive someone to run away. This was likely physical abuse. That's just what the idea of the commentators are. But there is a lot of looking at the dynamics of what does it mean to be a woman in power, but not that much in power? What does it mean to be in a patriarchal society where your only agency is kind of to act in a limited realm, and you end up replicating some of the oppression that you yourself face? Because Sarai doesn't have that much agency, and she tried to take agency where she could find it. It backfired, but she has so little repercussion. She just takes it out on the person below her. And what's up?
I was going to say, I want to comment on the commentators. Are they all men?
No.
Okay. Because, you know, the dynamics between two women. Now, if you're going to compare this to the South, then truly those slaves were subservient. Their lives would be at risk for actually murder or whatever. They were so definitely in a subservient position. And I'm not seeing this as that extreme. Yes, she was subservient, but not as extreme as in the South during slavery.
So a lot of my commentary specifically comes from Black women theologians looking at this text. I will be honest and open. That's the commentary that I internalized, because it's one of those that I remember reading this in Sunday school, and I don't remember some of those dynamics ever being brought out. It was kind of just glazed over as oh, this happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, but there is a question of how severe is this, because the slavery in the American South was in some ways uniquely brutal in ways that other forms of slavery weren't necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, how much time do we have? We have 20 minutes left. So let's talk about what's going on at the end here, because there are some other interesting dynamics of this conversation between Hagar and the angel of the Lord. So once again, talking about a translation issue, or not translate issue, a translation feature. We translate, wait, what's up?
Well, I'm already on your train of thought. I haven't let you finish, But one thing that pops out to me, is this the first time an angel of the Lord spoke to a woman?
No.
Yes. So, yes, keep that in mind. I want one clarification here on language. That is the angel of the Lord. The word for angel is a messy word. It means the like hard translation is a messenger of the Lord. We translate it to say angel because that's our connotation, and that connotation we see show up in other places. There are some times where the angel of the Lord is kind of just talking about God. This is a specific feature of certain writers. I believe I need to look up which source uses this phrase the most, but we will see that Hagar treats the angel of the Lord as God, just like flat out. And we see other places where the angel of the Lord comes and just speaks for God, which is kind of the idea of where we get the Metatron, which is the voice box for God. So there's this kind of ambiguity if the messenger of the Lord is like an angel as we think of it today, or if that's just a euphemism of God showed up.
Mhm.
So that's, especially in Genesis, that idea is very fluid of what actually an angel of the Lord is. But all we know is that there is a messenger of God that meets Hagar in the wilderness. So we have this conversation where note, and we will see this reoccur, there is a water issue, and while they've been traveling in a big caravan, this is a single person, and there's actually a very real chance of death out here, just if you don't have the company of people to take care of your needs. We don't know what she has with her. She actually could die in the wilderness. But we see the angel of the Lord say, Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? So what are features that you notice in that sentence alone? Yeah, Larry.
The angel doesn't say wife of Abraham.
No.
It's slave girl of Sarai.
But she's also identified by this messenger of the Lord as a slave girl.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this angelic messenger identify her not just by name, but by rank and title.
Mm-hmm.
Status, what her status is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what does that do when you have God kind of reaffirm the meaning status?
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, that would be very, when Hagar heard this, I mean, this is the highest authority and you are a slave. Kind of took away her delusions of being a wife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she comments back, I am running away from my mistress. And the angel says, return and submit. How does that feel?
Go back to being a slave. Not so good.
This is where a lot of people have problems with this story. The fact that an all-loving God would tell a slave, go back to being a slave and submit. Sits uneasy with me, I'll be honest.
Well, but then in the next phrases, he says, I will greatly multiply your offsprings. So he's giving her, the word slap down comes to mind, but it's kind of like, this is your position, go back and submit. But you will also be multiply your offspring, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, here's the bad, but here's the future.
I think it's better than dying in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, since we don't know how severe her situation was that prompted her, maybe she overreacted. Maybe she, told Sarah, you promised me all these things and now you're not fulfilling them. I'm leaving.
So a few ideas from different commentators. First one, there is one that I've read that says that at this point, the reason why the angel of the Lord may have identified her as a slave girl and said, go back and submit, is actually because Hagar can't imagine herself as anything but a slave girl. She's just a runaway slave girl, and she is actually limited by her own imagination.
Oh.
Nah? That's
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know, the text sort of suggests that after getting impregnated, she certainly got heirs, or at least some evidence that. Am I getting feedback? Well,
is someone beeping? Oh, I think that's Mary Ellen.
yeah, I guess it's not me. Okay. You know, she certainly developed some sort of acknowledgement that her stature had been increased immensely.
Yeah. So
Well,
one of the words that's already been kind of tossed around that I do want to unpack a little bit is the term uppity. So
Yeah.
uppity is specifically a racialized word in America for Black women, often who had this kind of raised status, and white women kind of like putting them back down, of like, be in your station, go back down, don't think you can be raised up. They are uppity, they are acting beyond their class. And so that's why I was cautioned a little bit of that term, because that was one of the things that was said about these Black women carrying the master's children. Here, Mary Ellen, is there something beeping? Okay.
All right, she's got her. You're muted.
Check your mute, Mary Ellen. Check your mute.
Okay. Okay, they fixed it. Could you be hearing the alarm?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a false alarm, but okay. No. Sorry about all that.
No worries. Okay. But
So,
Sue, you look like you had something to say.
So uppity is not in the Bible, but it is that she's feeling her out, shall we say, a little bit. And Sarah feels displaced and maybe demeaned a little.
So here's another hard question, and I don't expect a definite answer. Is it a bad thing to be self-confident when the world tells you that you shouldn't be?
No.
No.
Because in this situation, Hagar's being told that you're nothing more than a slave. Come on, act like you're nothing more than a slave. Be subservient. And I got a feel for the girl if she was like, I'm confident in myself and I'm going to act like I have dignity.
Yeah.
But what happened to her then?
In today's day and age, yes, absolutely. I agree that she should follow her own inner voice, but in those days, it could cause her a whole lot of problems.
And it did.
But look who is Hagar talking to. She's talking to the Lord.
Okay.
Is she going to tell him, hey, I'm just going to go do my thing? Or is she going to listen to what he says? And he says, go back, submit, good times are coming. We've heard that phrase repeatedly since Eve ate the apple, you know?
So here's the hard thing, is that there are, like, yes, we can look at the characters in the story and see the way God is acting and see what's being promised, see things, how things turned out. But, and I know we talked a lot about this when we were in the Gospels, is this prescriptive or descriptive? And for me, I read the story as describing the situation, not telling us how we should act, but people looked here to justify their own actions and did take it as prescriptive. And this is where we're actually in a weird time right now. This story right here that we are reading, even the part of go back and submit, is the basis for the dystopian book, The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh.
And the TV series. That whole series is based on this. And people took, when slavery was an institution in America, they looked here and said, look, God said submit. They should submit. And they took this as a prescription of how people should act.
Well, it's something the Mormons are preaching as well. You know, total submission to your husband. I don't know if this is the exact Bible verse that they get it from, but I mean, it's here and now. You know, in the FLDS, it's very much, it's keep sweet. And, you know, it exists today worldwide.
It does.
So after, okay, he settles, I have another question about Hagar. He says that her son is going to be a wild ass of a man with his hand against everyone. Now that's like, go back, but you're going to have a rotten kid. I mean, it's not exactly a gift.
So here's a few things, and these are the final dynamics that I wish we could talk about a little bit more. I told you this story was loaded. Here are some cool things that are just features of this story. So number one, there is a covenant here. God is covenanting with Hagar because Hagar's action is go back. And there is, if you go back, there is a promise. This is a covenant with specifically a woman, which is really cool. And part of that covenant is we see that Hagar is part of Abraham's covenant. You will also have descendants beyond count. She all of a sudden is in the covenant before Sarai is. God incorporates her in and it's like, you are not being left out. Go back, but you're not going to be left out. The thing is, so Sue, yes, in our modern day standards, being a wild ass of a man is kind of a diss. This is song to Hagar's ears. What she is likely hearing as a slave girl is, your son will submit to no one.
Okay.
He is a wild ass of a man. He will not be contained. He will likely be a leader. And it wasn't necessarily an insult because the Arab people at the time took like this rugged individual kind of persona of like, we are going to go in and we're going to be strong. It's basically giving him strength and numbers beyond count. There is that promise there.
Well, it's still part of the culture, isn't it? The
right.
Arab.
Right. So she may not be free, but her child will be free. But the last thing, and this is the thing that I find so amazing that this part of the story was held on to, was the fact, look at verse 13. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, Yuel El Roy. El means God, Roy means who sees. She names God, the God who sees me. She is the first person in the Bible to give God a name. She names God as a servant girl, and it was recorded. We won't see anything like that for a long time. She names God, and they kept it. Which means, even though they're telling her to go back and be a slave, she now has agency. She has choice. She saw God and lived, which is a huge deal. You see her kind of freaking out that it's like, oh my gosh, I interacted with God. I'm not dead. Because most people thought if you saw God, you were dead. Mm-hmm. So she sees God, she lives, she's told her child would be free, her descendants will be beyond number, and she names God. This is no longer a subservient woman, even if she goes back as a slave girl. She now has agency.
Do we ever hear of her again?
Yes, we do. Do not fear. This will all come up again. So, with 1 minute remaining, is there any last thoughts on this story?
I don't have it. I'm just curious if anybody wrote an opera or something related to this, because it would make a great story.
So this story is also, we don't have time to talk about it now, but I will go into it later because it specifically comes up in part 2 of Hagar's story. This is actually the basis of the Islamic faith, and they reenact it when they go to Mecca. It is beautiful, and there are elements of this, and we'll go, because that's a complicated history unto itself, but I will go into how this gets incorporated. So it's not a movie, but they, part of the Hajj, their pilgrimage to Mecca, is reenacting parts of this story.
Oh,
neat. Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah. All right, so we'll pick this up again. We aren't going to have Bible study for the next 2 weeks because I'm on vacation. So I have the dates in the notes coming out. We're going to read the next chapter. We're going to talk about circumcision, which is fun. We're just hitting all the highlights. All right. So can I give us a quick prayer out?
Yes.
God of Hagar, you saw her when she ran away and was in a desperate place. And we know as a part of the story that you were still looking after her, even when the story is confusing, even when she was confused, even though when she didn't know where to go. And she named you the God who sees. And we still hold on to that name for you, God. You are the God who also sees us in our struggles, in our good days and our bad days. And we just ask that you be present with us when we cry out to you, that you see us in our own struggles, and that you may help us even when the way is tough and we don't have all the answers. So we look to you now and always. We pray this in Jesus's name. Amen.
Amen. Bye, everybody.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Have a good vacation.
Thanks.